The king is going to sign tomorrow. You have heard this said in a whisper, in a shout, in the flat voice of a man who cannot quite believe what he is saying. The king is going to sign. There is a river here, and a field, and on the field there are tents stretching further than you can count, and somewhere inside that city of canvas and rope and mud, men who have been at war with their own king for 6 months are waiting out the last night of it. You are one of them. Not one of the great men. Not one of the 25 who will be named in the document. You carry water. You polish boots. You hold horses. And tomorrow, when the most important piece of parchment in the history of England is sealed, you will be standing somewhere at the back, too far away to hear anything, close enough to say you were there. But tonight you are in the tent, and the candle is burning low, and the man you serve cannot sleep. There is a document that says a king cannot imprison you without trial. There is a clause that says justice cannot be sold. There are words written in Latin on sheepskin by men who are still alive and still arguing about the wording that will be read 800 years from now in parliaments that have not yet been imagined. Tonight, none of that exists yet. Tonight there is only the river and the mud and the waiting. The king, you have been told, is furious. The king has already written to Rome. The king is smiling in his tent across the water, and the smile is the kind that means nothing good. But the barons held. Your lord held. And tomorrow the seal goes down, and whatever comes after, at least this night happened. At least this field was real. There is a clause in this document about widows. There is a clause about fish weirs on the Thames. There are clauses about debt and inheritance and the standardization of weights and measures across the entire kingdom. 63 clauses total. Written on sheepskin. Sealed with wax. Copied by hand, by firelight, in a tent 50 yards from where you are sitting right now. The men who wrote it will not all live to see what it becomes. Neither will you. But here, in this field, on this night, in the year of our Lord 1215, it is being made. The river is there. The tents are there. The king is 4 miles away with a letter already sent to Rome asking the Pope to undo everything that happens tomorrow. And tomorrow has not happened yet. You fold the blanket. You check the water. You wait for morning. This is quiet history at bedtime. If this is your kind of story, a subscribe means everything right now. Every detail in this story comes from the historical record. Just relax and feel free to let this play as you drift off to sleep. Now, let us begin. Your name is not recorded anywhere. This is not a story about someone whose name was recorded. You are 22 years old, and you are the second surviving son of a minor landholding family from the north, from a village 2 days' ride east of York, in the county of Yorkshire. Your father holds a little under 100 acres. Not enough to make him powerful. Enough to make him someone. He owes service to a lord, and that lord owes service upward, and that chain of obligation runs all the way to the crown. This is the system. This is how England works. This is how it has worked since your grandfather's grandfather came over from Normandy with William 150 years ago. You have been in service since you were 14. 8 years. You know how to manage a horse in cold weather, how to read enough Latin to follow a church service, how to sharpen a blade correctly, how to stand still for long periods without being noticed. That last skill is the one that has served you best. The man you serve is called Robert. You do not think of him by his full title. In your head, he is just Robert, though you would never say this out loud. He is a baron of middling rank, not one of the great northern lords like Eustace de Vesci or Robert de Ros, who have been at the center of this rebellion from the beginning. Robert is further down the list. He has land in the north, 2 manors of moderate size, a household of perhaps 30 people, including servants and men-at-arms, and the legal grievances that every baron in England has accumulated over 15 years of John's reign. And he has you. You came into his service when you were 14, sent by your father to a cousin of Robert's who knew a man who knew that Robert needed a second body for his household after a fever took 2 of his people in the same winter. This is how these things happen. Not by plan, by proximity and need and someone knowing someone. You have been with him through 2 campaigns, 3 winter residences, a lawsuit over a disputed field boundary that took 4 years to resolve, and now this, the largest thing you have ever been part of, the largest thing you suspect that most of the men in this camp have ever been part of. You arrived at Runnymede. This is what they are calling the field, Runnymede, from the Anglo-Saxon words meaning the meadow of regular meeting, 4 days ago. The ride from London took the better part of 2 days. The field is on the south bank of the Thames, roughly 20 miles west of the city, between the villages of Egham and Staines. It is flat meadowland, damp, the kind of ground that holds a boot. The river is wide here, slow-moving, brown with silt from upstream. On the far bank, slightly to the north, is the island the locals call Magna Carta Island, though it does not have that name yet. Nothing has that name yet. The king's party camped on the north bank, on higher ground near Windsor. Windsor Castle is 4 miles away. You have seen its towers from a distance, gray against the gray sky, sitting above the river bend like something permanent and unmovable. The king comes out for the negotiations and goes back each night. This has been the pattern. 2 miles of distance maintained between the royal party and the barons, with the river between them like a line someone drew. The island in the middle is where the actual talking has happened. Neutral ground, technically, belonging to neither side, which is what made it usable. The barons' tents are on the south side of the river, on the meadow itself. 2,000 men, perhaps more. Horses, servants, knights, supply carts, farriers, cooks. The smell of it, wood smoke, horse dung, boiled meat, leather, is something you have stopped noticing. You have been breathing it for 4 days. You turn it over in your head while you stand there, the shape of everything that brought you to this field. John became King of England in 1199, when his brother Richard died of a crossbow wound taken during a minor siege in France. A small castle, a trivial dispute, a bolt fired by a crossbowman on the wall whose name was never recorded. Richard walked too close to the wall without his armor, and the bolt took him in the left shoulder, and the wound went bad, and 10 days later he was dead at 41. Richard the Lionheart, they called him. He had spent almost no time in England during his 10-year reign. He spoke French, not English. He spent his kingship on crusade and in captivity and fighting in France, and he taxed England heavily to fund all of it. England had already been paying when John inherited it. John's first major disaster came in 1204. Normandy fell. The Duchy of Normandy had been in the hands of the English crown since 1066, when William the Conqueror brought it with him across the Channel. For the Anglo-Norman barons, men whose families held land both in England and in France, this was not an abstract political problem. This was the loss of their French estates, their inheritance, their identity. Men whose grandfathers had been Norman first and English second suddenly found the Norman part of themselves cut off, confiscated by the French crown, irretrievable. John lost it in 6 months of military failure, and then he spent the next 10 years trying to get it back, which meant money, which always meant money. The system by which the king raised money from his barons was called scutage, shield money. In theory, every baron owed the king military service, a certain number of knights for a certain number of days per year. The number of knights owed depended on the size of the barony, measured in knights' fees, units of land theoretically large enough to support one armed knight. In practice, many barons preferred to pay money instead of sending men. This was legal. This was normal. The king then used that money to hire professional soldiers, mercenaries, men who fought for pay rather than obligation, who could be deployed more flexibly than the feudal levy. But John called scutage 11 times in 17 years. 11 times. The standard rate under earlier kings had been around 2 marks per knight's fee. John charged up to 3, sometimes more, and he varied the rate unpredictably, so no baron could plan ahead or know what he would owe until the demand arrived. He also invented new charges, new fees, new fines. If a baron died and his heir wanted to inherit the estate, he had to pay a relief, an inheritance tax, essentially. The law said the relief should be a reasonable amount. John set these reliefs at whatever number he thought he could extract. 100 marks. 500 marks. 1,000 marks for a great earldom. Whatever the traffic would bear. He made barons pay for the right to marry their own daughters as they chose. He made barons pay for royal favor, for the resolution of lawsuits, for access to the king's court. He sold justice the way a merchant sells cloth. He sold widows. This is not a metaphor. A noblewoman whose husband died became a ward of the crown, and the king could marry her to whomever he chose, often to one of his own supporters as a reward, or charge her money for the right to remain unmarried or to choose her own husband. This was called a fine for not remarrying. John collected them aggressively. He kept detailed records of who owed what, and he pursued the debts with a persistence that the barons found, across 15 years, increasingly unbearable. And then there was the church. In 1205, the Archbishop of Canterbury died. The Archbishopric of Canterbury was the most important church position in England. The Archbishop was the spiritual head of the country, the man who crowned kings, the man whose authority stood between Rome and the English Church. John wanted his own man installed. Pope Innocent III wanted someone else. Stephen Langton, a respected English scholar who had been working and teaching in Rome, a man of genuine intellectual distinction who had written extensively on scripture and canon law. John had never met Langton. He refused him anyway. The principle was the point: the right of the crown to control church appointments in England. This fight had been going on in various forms for a century, ever since Henry II and Thomas Becket, and everyone who took a position in it knew they were standing in a long line of men who had taken positions in it. John refused. Innocent placed England under interdict in 1208. Interdict meant no church services, no masses, no church weddings, no Christian burial. The churches went silent. The bells stopped. For 6 years, English people were born and married and died without the sacraments that the Church said were necessary for salvation. Babies went unbaptized. The dead were buried in unconsecrated ground, sometimes in ditches, without a priest. John responded by seizing church property, the revenues of English parishes, the income of church estates, and diverting them into his own treasury. He made a profit on the interdict. The Pope excommunicated him. John ignored it for 5 years. He continued to govern, to wage war, to collect taxes, while technically standing outside the church. Eventually he gave in. In 1213, he surrendered England to the Pope as a papal fief, becoming technically a vassal of Rome, paying annual tribute of 1,000 marks, accepting Langton as archbishop. The barons watched all of this. They watched the scutage. They watched the reliefs. They watched the widows sold and the church silenced, and England handed to Rome like a piece of property. And then in 1214, John launched his last attempt to retake Normandy. He had been building toward it for years, assembling allies in continental Europe, most importantly the Holy Roman Emperor Otto IV and the Count of Flanders, planning a two-front attack on the French crown. The plan was not stupid. The execution was catastrophic. The northern barons refused to follow him to France. They said the feudal levy did not require them to serve overseas. He called another scutage. The northern barons refused that too. This was the breach. This was the moment when the refusal became organized, when individual grievances became a collective position, when the men who had been muttering in private started meeting in person. In August 1214, the French crushed John's continental allies at the Battle of Bouvines. Normandy was gone permanently. The money was gone. The allies were gone. And John came home to a kingdom where the barons were no longer willing to pretend. By the spring of 1215, the barons were in open war. They called themselves the Army of God and the Holy Church. They captured London in May, the city opening its gates to them. The merchants and citizens of London had their own grievances against John, their own reasons to want a settlement. With London gone, John had no choice but to negotiate. And so Runnymede. And so this field. And so tonight. The camp at dusk had been something to see. You arrived here 4 days ago in the mid-afternoon, after 2 days of riding from London, and your first view of the field was from the crest of a low rise to the south. The meadow below you spread wide and flat, and on it the tents already going up in the hundreds, the color of them pale against the green grass, the smoke of the first cook fires threading upward into the still air. You had seen camps before. You had been on campaign in the north twice with Robert's household, sleeping rough in wet fields, eating badly, managing horses through mud that sucked at the hooves and soaked everything within a day. This was something else. This was a city. A temporary city built in a field by a river, assembled in days out of canvas and rope and wooden poles, and the organized labor of several thousand people who had all arrived from different directions with the same purpose. The organization of it impressed you even before you had unpacked. Supply carts had come separately, by road from London and from the surrounding villages, carrying grain and salt meat and firewood and hay for the horses and charcoal for the enclosed braziers. A blacksmith had set up a portable forge near the horse lines on the second day, the ring of his hammer carrying across the whole camp in the morning air. 2 physicians had established a tent in the center of the camp. Minor injuries and the ordinary sicknesses that follow large gatherings, the camp flux that comes when many men eat and drink in close proximity without adequate sanitation. This is what you had not understood about war before you first went on campaign. The logistics of it. The organization of feeding and housing and moving thousands of people without a permanent structure to support them. The way a skilled quartermaster is worth more than a dozen knights in terms of keeping an army functional. You had thought war was fighting. War is mostly carrying things. The sun has gone now. The field is dark except for the fires. The sky above it is a deep and pressured dark, the clouds from the south covering everything, not a star visible. You pick up the water bucket and head back toward Robert's tent. You carry a bucket of water across the camp and duck inside Robert's tent. The tent is not large. It fits a cot, a folding table, 2 camp stools, a chest for the good clothes, a smaller chest for documents, and the wax seals Robert uses for his own correspondence. There is a brazier burning low in the corner, iron, squat, filled with charcoal. Charcoal burns cleaner than wood in an enclosed space. Fewer fumes. This is something you learned on campaign in the north 3 years ago, when a man in a sealed tent died from the smoke of green wood during a cold snap when the temperature dropped fast and someone shut every gap in the canvas to keep the warmth in. You learned it once, and you did not forget it. Robert is sitting on the edge of the cot. He is not a tall man, but he is broad across the shoulder in the way that men who have trained with weapons since childhood tend to be, the muscles built into the structure of the body rather than sitting on top of it. He is perhaps 40 years old. You have been in his service since he was a young lord, just inheriting his estate, and the relationship between you has the quality of long proximity, not friendship. The distance is too structural for that, but something more than pure function. He knows you. You know him. You set the bucket down near the brazier and do not speak. The tent has the smell of all campaign tents, canvas and leather, and the close warmth of a small enclosed space containing a living body and a burning fire. You have slept in this smell for 8 years, or variations of it, and it is as close to the smell of home as anything you have. Robert says without looking up, "They finalized the language today." You wait. He says, Clause 39. He says it the way a man says a number he has memorized by repetition, not reading it, not thinking it, just producing it, the way you produce the order of dressing in the morning without having to decide. You know what it means. You have been close enough to enough conversations over the past 4 days to understand the shape of the document, even if you have not seen it. Clause 39 says that no free man shall be taken, imprisoned, dispossessed, exiled, or in any way destroyed except by the lawful judgment of his peers or by the law of the land. This is not a new idea. The barons did not invent it. But no one has ever made a king write it down before. You think about what it means to write something down. In your household, documents exist for specific purposes: charters of land ownership, records of legal agreements, letters to other households and to the crown. Documents are made when something needs to be permanently recorded, when the memory of living people is not considered sufficient evidence. A document is a way of saying, this is true, and it was true before you were born, and it will be true after you die. A document outlasts the people who made it. This is why the church maintains archives. This is why Robert has a chest of documents in his hall at home, carefully maintained, periodically inspected to ensure the parchment has not been damaged by damp or vermin. The documents in that chest are his title to his land. Without them, the land is still his. He holds it, he has held it, his family has held it for generations. But proving it against a challenge becomes significantly more difficult. With the documents, the proof is there. The evidence is there. Written down. Clause 39 is John writing down that he will not imprison free men without legal judgment. John's commitment to this principle before tonight existed only in the form of his word. And John's word is not, you have heard it said by men who have dealt with him directly, a reliable instrument. Now it is written. Now it is on parchment. Now it is sealed. Whether this makes it reliable is a separate question. But the writing is the first step. Robert says he signed the provisional terms at Magna Carta Island on the 15th. Tomorrow they seal the copies. He says copies. There will be several, each written by hand, in Latin, on sheepskin, by the royal chancery scribes who have been working since the negotiations began. The exact number is debated even among the men in this camp. 4, someone said. Perhaps more. Each one equally valid. Each one a record. The candle gutters. You reach for the spare and light it from the dying one, the flame passing between them in the still air of the tent without interruption. Robert watches you do this and says nothing. Outside the tent, the camp is settling. You can hear horses shifting in their lines, the quiet creak of tack, the occasional soft sound of hooves on damp grass. You can hear far off the sound of someone hammering something metal, a farrier maybe, working late on a shoe that needs replacing before morning. The river makes no sound you can distinguish from here, but you know it is there. Tomorrow it will all move toward the field. And whatever happens after tomorrow, whatever John does, whatever Rome does, whatever any of them do, tonight is the last night of the before. You fold the spare blanket at the foot of the cot and leave the candle burning low. Robert has not told you to leave. He has not told you to stay. You have been doing this long enough to know that sometimes the instruction is silence, and your job is to be inside it without making it heavier. You sit on the camp stool near the tent entrance. The brazier breathes its low red light. Outside, England is very quiet. The first time you heard the name John, you were 10 years old. Not the king. A pig. Your father's best breeding sow had a litter that spring and named one of the piglets John, and when you asked why, he laughed and said there was no animal stupider or meaner, and the name seemed to fit. You did not understand the joke then. You understand it now. You are sitting on the camp stool in the corner of Robert's tent, and the night is pressing in from all sides, and you are thinking about things that have no use to anyone. This is what happens when there is nothing left to do. You think sideways. You think about the ride from London. 2 days. The road out of London through Southwark, and then west along the river, through the market towns, past the villages where people came to their gates to watch the column of men and horses pass. Some of them looked afraid. A column of armed men on a road is always a reason to be afraid, even if the column is traveling with apparent purpose and discipline, even if no one is stopping to take anything. The presence of armed men on a road means something is happening, and what is happening is rarely good for ordinary people in ordinary villages. You watched their faces as you passed. An old woman standing at the edge of her vegetable garden, a hoe in her hand, watching you with an expression that contained no particular emotion, just the flat assessment of someone who has watched columns pass before and knows how to calculate her own exposure. A boy of perhaps 12, perched on a fence post, watching with open fascination, the way a child watches anything large and organized and moving. A man in a leather apron, a smith, maybe, or a tanner, standing in a doorway, arms crossed, his expression the closed expression of a man who has opinions about what he is seeing but will not share them with anyone on that road. You thought about them on the ride. About what the Charter means to people who are not barons. Clause 12, no scutage without common council, protects the barons from arbitrary taxation. It does not protect the old woman with the hoe. It does not protect the boy on the fence. The free men protected by Clause 39 are free men, a legal category that includes barons and knights and some townspeople, but does not include the villains, the people tied to the land, the people who make up most of the countryside. The charter is not a document for everyone. You know this. You are not a villain. Your family's 100 acres and your 8 years of service put you in a different legal position than a man who cannot leave his lord's land without permission. But you are not a baron either. You exist in the space between, a space that the charter addresses obliquely, if at all. This is not a complaint. You are not certain that a complaint would be appropriate, even if you had one. The world is arranged as it is arranged, and rearranging it requires more force than any individual in your position can apply. But you think about the old woman with the hoe, and then you stop thinking about her because there is nothing to be done about it tonight. The brazier has burned lower. There is still enough light to see by, barely. Robert is lying on the cot now, not asleep, facing the canvas wall. He has been lying there for perhaps an hour. You know he is not asleep because his breathing has not changed. You know his sleeping breathing. You have slept in the same room as this man for 6 years, in halls and tents, and once in a barn during a storm that took 3 days to pass, the rain coming in sheets hard enough to make conversation impossible, the two of you sitting on opposite sides of a cold hearth waiting for something that did not end when you expected it to. He is not asleep. He is thinking. You have been thinking too, in the sideways way that night encourages. You have been thinking about the other servants in this camp, about the hundreds of men in positions like yours, the seconds and thirds and fourths of minor families, placed into service at 14 or 15 because the land didn't need them and service would keep them fed and give them some shape of standing in the world. You passed one of them this afternoon, near the supply carts. A young man, perhaps 16, carrying a leather saddlebag that was clearly too heavy for him, listing slightly to one side, his face arranged into the expression of someone who is not going to acknowledge that anything is difficult. You recognize the expression. You wore it yourself at 16. The stubborn determination to look as if you are managing, because managing is the job, and looking like you are not managing suggests that you were wrong to be given the job. You watched him pass without speaking. There is a language between servants, but it is not always the language of words. Sometimes it is the language of recognition. The brief meeting of eyes that says, "I see what you are doing, I have done it, you will get better at it." I will not say this out loud because neither of us has time for sentiment. You wonder what the boy's name is. You wonder which lord he serves, which household, which thin slice of the great baronial coalition assembled on this field has his 12 shillings a year in its accounts. You wonder if he has slept. You wonder if he is thinking about the same things you are thinking about, or if his mind is on the saddlebag and the morning and the practical demands of his specific morning. You suspect it is the practical demands. You are not certain that philosophical reflection is a luxury everyone has in equal measure. It may require a certain amount of practice, the way throwing a blade requires practice, not natural, not automatic, something you develop by doing it repeatedly until it becomes available on demand. You have had 6 years of nights like this one. Nights of waiting and watching and existing in the margins of other people's events. That is a lot of practice. Outside, the camp has gone almost entirely quiet. The hammering stopped an hour ago. There are still guards. You can hear the occasional creak of movement, the soft jingle of mail, but the talking has stopped. All of them choosing silence at the same time. This is not nothing. You get up and add a piece of charcoal to the brazier. Carefully, so it makes no sound. The small iron tongs are hanging on the side of the brazier where you left them. One piece of charcoal. You watch the new piece sit dark against the red and then begin to catch. Charcoal is made by burning wood slowly in a low oxygen environment, in a covered pit or under a pile of earth, until almost everything is driven out of it except the carbon. What you are left with is nearly pure carbon. It burns at a higher temperature than wood, produces almost no smoke, and holds its heat longer. It costs more than wood, significantly more. Charcoal this far from the city would be carried in sacks on supply carts, and Robert's household accounts would show a line item for it. You have never looked at Robert's household accounts, but you understand roughly what your own existence costs him. Your wage is perhaps 12 shillings a year. A skilled craftsman in a town, a blacksmith, a carpenter with a reputation, might earn 4 or 5 times that. You are not a craftsman. You are a body in a particular position, trained to occupy that position quietly. 12 shillings a year, plus your food, your clothing. Robert's household provides the basic cloth, and you sew your own garments, and a sleeping space in whatever building or tent the household occupies. You have saved perhaps 30 shillings in 8 years of service. It sits in a small leather pouch at the bottom of your traveling pack. You have no clear plan for it. Robert shifts on the cot. He says, without turning around, "What do you know about the document?" It is not quite a question. You tell him what you have heard, that it is called the Charter of Liberties, that it has 63 clauses, that the most important of them are the ones about imprisonment and taxation and the judgment of peers. Robert says 63 is a lot of clauses. You say, "Yes, my lord." He says, "Do you know which ones matter?" You say you know some of them. He says, "Tell me." You have been listening for 4 days. In a camp like this, if you know how to be unobtrusive, if you know how to carry a cup of wine to a table and then become part of the background while the men around the table keep talking, you can hear a great deal. You have been doing this your entire working life. Here is what you know. The document was drafted over weeks of negotiation, beginning in early June. Stephen Langton was involved, the Archbishop of Canterbury, the same man John had refused to accept and then eventually accepted when Rome backed him into a corner. Langton is one of the few people in this negotiation trusted by both sides. He drafted significant portions of the language, and his involvement gave the document a theological legitimacy it might not otherwise have had. It was not merely a baronial demand list, it was a statement endorsed by the highest church authority in England. The document draws on older precedents, the coronation charter of Henry I, issued in 1100, in which Henry had promised to end the abuses of his predecessor William Rufus. The barons had a copy of that charter. They had been circulating it among themselves since January, passing it from household to household, using it as evidence that the idea of written royal promises was not a new invention, that kings had done this before and could be made to do it again. The Articles of the Barons, 49 demands, presented to John in May, formed the working draft. The final document refined and expanded that language. 63 clauses. You try to organize them in your head the way you heard a lawyer in camp organize them, grouping by subject. Clause 1. The English Church shall be free, and shall have its rights undiminished. This was the Church's price for Langton's involvement. Clause 12. No scutage or aid shall be imposed in the kingdom except by the common council of the kingdom. This is the one that touches your lord most directly. No more arbitrary taxation. The king must ask. Clause 39, which Robert named just now. Clause 40. To no one will we sell. To no one will we deny or delay right or justice. You have heard this one quoted in this tent twice in 4 days by 2 different men. Both times they said it in Latin first, and then in plain speech, as if the Latin needed to be domesticated before it could be believed. And Clause 61, the security clause. This is the one that makes the document something more than a list of promises. Clause 61 establishes 25 barons, chosen by the rebel lords, who have the legal authority to seize the king's lands and castles if he breaks the terms of the charter. 25 men with the lawful right to make war on the king if he fails to keep his word. You say this last part carefully. Robert has turned over on the cot. He is looking at the canvas ceiling. He says the 25. He says it the way he says Clause 39. He is not on the list of 25. He told you this on the second day, not as a complaint, just as a fact, the way he tells you practical information, the kind that affects plans. The list includes the most powerful rebel barons: Robert de Ros, Richard de Percy, Eustace de Vesey in the north, Geoffrey de Mandeville in the east, Sire de Quincy, William de Mowbray. The men with the largest estates, the most knights, the most leverage. The men whose names would be remembered. Robert's name will not be in the document. His land is here, in this rebellion, in this field, and when the settlement comes it will matter that he was here, but the document itself will not carry him. You understand, this is the thing he is lying awake about. Not whether the charter will hold. Not whether John will break it. Whether being here, in this field, at this moment, counts for something, when the accounting eventually comes. You say nothing. You are 22 years old, and you have the sense not to name things that do not need naming. Robert says, "What do you think he will do?" You know he means John. You say, "I don't know, my lord." Robert says, "Guess." You say, "He will agree." He has to agree. Robert says, "And then?" You do not answer that, because you do not know, and you suspect Robert does not know either, and saying so out loud would make it heavier than it needs to be tonight. Here is what you do know, not from tonight's conversation, but from 4 days of listening in this camp. John came to Runnymede because he had no choice. London had fallen to the barons in May. London is the financial center of England, the city through which tax revenue flows, the city whose merchants and goldsmiths fund royal operations, the city whose walls make it defensible for whoever holds it. Without London, John could not pay his mercenaries. Without mercenaries, he could not fight. He was not surrendering because he had changed. He was calculating. He had already sent a letter to Pope Innocent III describing the charter as shameful, demeaning, illegal, and unjust, and asking the Pope to annul it. That letter was written before the ink was dry, possibly before the ink existed. No one in this camp knows this for certain. But the older men, the ones who have been watching John for 15 years, say that his submission is not submission. They say he is buying time. They say the smile means he already has a plan. You think about John and the Pope. John and Innocent III have a complicated history, even after the resolution of the interdict. When John surrendered England to Rome in 1213, when he became technically the Pope's vassal, he did not do it out of genuine submission. He did it because he needed allies. He was planning the campaign to retake Normandy. He needed the Pope's support, or at least the Pope's neutrality. He needed England declared a papal fief so that his enemies could not claim church sanction for rebellion against him. He needed Innocent on his side. And Innocent, who is a sophisticated political operator himself, understood what John was doing and accepted it anyway. Because Innocent also wanted things. He wanted the English church free from royal control. He wanted his candidate, Langton, in Canterbury. He wanted the annual tribute. He got all of these. And now John is writing to Innocent, asking him to annul the charter. And Innocent, who endorsed the peace negotiations through Langton, who was theoretically in favor of a settlement, may annul it. Because Innocent is also a king of a kind. The Pope is the sovereign of a territory, the head of an institution, a man with interests and alliances and calculations. And Innocent's calculation may determine that a strong English king who owes him tribute and has submitted to his authority is more useful than a barren, constrained English king who has reduced royal power to the point where the tribute may be harder to collect. You do not know if this is right. You are 22 years old, and you have never been to Rome, and you have no particular insight into the mind of the Bishop of Rome. But you have been listening for 4 days, and this is what you have assembled from the pieces. You think about this and say none of it. Outside, the river is somewhere in the dark. You have not seen it since sunset. But you know it is there, the Thames, running west to east, carrying the melt of the spring somewhere toward London and the sea. The field where the barons camped, Runnymede, has a quality all its own at night. It is flat and open, and the sky sits very low over it, and the torches in the camp make the edges of the tents glow orange from the inside, like paper lanterns. You have never seen a paper lantern, but you have heard them described by a merchant who came back from Constantinople, a man who had traveled far enough to see things that England had no equivalent for. That is what the tents look like tonight. A city of orange paper in the dark. You are inside one of them, sitting on a camp stool, staying awake while your lord thinks. This is the work. Not the exciting part. Not the part that gets written down. The staying. The being present. The water in the bucket and the charcoal in the brazier and the candle replaced before it goes out. You think about what Clause 12 means if it holds. No scutage without common counsel. Your father paid scutage. Not as a baron. He is too small for that. His obligation passes through intermediate lords before it reaches the crown. But the charge flows downward through the system and reaches everyone eventually. Your father had 100 acres and a large debt to his lord, and 3 sons, of whom one became a priest in a small parish church outside York. One became you, and one stayed home to help work the land, and will eventually inherit what there is to inherit, which is not much but is something. Clause 12, if it holds, means the king must ask a council before he can levy that charge again. The council is not the common people. It is the great barons and the bishops. But it is something. It is a place where the word no has legal weight. You do not know if it will hold. Robert says very quietly, as if to himself, the chancery scribes were still working this evening. He means the copies. The royal scribes who produce official documents work in the chancery, the king's administrative office, which travels with the court. They are writing out the copies tonight, by hand, in Latin, on parchment made from sheepskin. A single sheet of parchment this size, a large document with 63 clauses, requires a sheepskin with the wool removed, scraped thin with a lunellum, stretched on a frame while wet, dried under tension, then scraped again with a pumice stone to create an even surface for the ink. The whole process takes days. The scribes working tonight are writing on parchment prepared weeks ago in anticipation of this moment. Parchment is not paper. It is skin. The document you will see sealed tomorrow morning is made of an animal. The scribes use quill pens cut from goose feathers, the nibs shaped and split with a penknife to create a controlled flow of ink. The ink is iron gall, made from oak galls, the hard, round growths that form on oak trees when a wasp lays eggs in the bark, combined with iron sulfate, water, and gum arabic as a binder. It reacts with the parchment as it dries, bonding to the surface rather than sitting on top of it. This is why old documents survive. The ink becomes part of the material. You have seen documents from your lord's archive that are 40 years old and still perfectly readable, the letters sharp and dark on the pale surface. The copy being made tonight will outlast everyone in this field. This you know the way you know about charcoal and the brazier, not as a fact you were taught, but as something you have absorbed from being near the making of things. Robert sits up. He swings his legs off the cot and puts his feet on the ground and sits for a moment with his hands on his knees, looking at the brazier. He says, "Get some sleep." He is talking to you. You say, "My lord." He says, "The morning will come whether you're ready for it or not." This is true of most mornings. You say, "Yes, my lord." He lies back down. You do not move to the pallet on the ground immediately. You stay on the stool for a moment, looking at the brazier, watching the charcoal breathe. It will need another piece in 2 hours. You will be awake for that. You always are, in a new place, in a tent, in any space that is not entirely familiar. Your body keeps a kind of watch that does not require your conscious participation. You fold yourself onto the pallet and pull the blanket up and listen to the camp outside, which is nearly silent now, which is doing the thing that many people in one field sometimes do at night, which is breathe together without meaning to. The river is out there. The document is out there, being copied by firelight in a tent you have never been inside. The king is 4 miles away, awake or sleeping, smiling or not. And the morning is somewhere east of here, taking its time, coming whether you are ready or not. You close your eyes. The brazier settles. The camp breathes. You let it. You wake before you meant to. Not from a sound, from nothing, from the quality of the silence that comes just before something changes, a quality you have learned to recognize without being able to describe. The brazier has gone low. You can see the faint orange pulse of it across the tent, breathing, but only just. You get up without making noise. This is a skill you learned early and have practiced longer than almost anything else. How to move in the dark in an enclosed space without waking the person sleeping inside it. Bare feet on packed earth. The cold comes up through the ground immediately, a flat cold that the thin sole of a sleeping foot receives all at once. June in England is not warm at night, not this close to the river, not in a field where the damp has been rising through the grass since sundown and the canvas of the tent has been breathing moisture since shortly after dark. You add 2 pieces of charcoal to the brazier. You do it slowly, setting each piece rather than dropping it. The new pieces sit dark on top of the red for a moment, and then the red begins to climb. You watch it until you are sure it has caught. Then you stand and look at the tent opening, not outside, just at the canvas. The light on the other side of it has not changed. Still dark, still night. Robert is asleep now. His breathing has finally shifted into the longer, slower rhythm that you have learned to recognize over 6 years. He fell asleep sometime in the last hour. You do not know exactly when. You were near the edge of sleep yourself and then came back, the way you always do when you are on watch in a strange place. Your body keeps time without you. You pull your boots on and lace them and sit back on the stool. There is nothing to do right now except exist in this tent while the night finishes itself. So you think, here is what you have been turning over since you lay down. Not just the clauses. The weeks before this. You were not in the room where the negotiations happened, but you were close enough to the room to understand the shape of them. The negotiations began in early June, after a preliminary meeting in May at which John had agreed in principle to consider the Baron's demands. The consideration had not gone smoothly. John had come to Runnymede, the first meeting, on the 10th of June. The barons had presented the articles of the barons, 49 points, drafted by Langton and revised by the baronial council, covering taxation and justice and the church and the rights of inheritance and the treatment of widows and the regulation of fish weirs and almost everything else that had been a source of complaint for 15 years. John had read them. He had agreed to them in principle. And then he had come back the next day with objections to the specific language. And then the lawyers had argued about the specific language. And then the language had been revised, and more objections had been raised, and more revision had followed. 5 days of this. 5 days of men in tents on an island in the Thames, arguing about the precise wording of Latin phrases, while the two armies camped on opposite banks, and the weather came and went and everyone waited. You had watched it from the south bank. The boats crossing between the island and the two banks. The figures moving. The posture of men who are in the middle of something difficult and cannot yet see where it ends. On the 15th, yesterday, the king had agreed to the full document. He had placed his seal on the preliminary terms, not the final sealed copies, those were still being prepared, but the indication of agreement that allowed the scribes to begin work on the official versions. And now tonight, and tomorrow. The document, the charter, the articles made formal and sealed, is not one thing. You have understood this gradually, through fragments of conversation in this camp over 4 days. The charter is not one agreement. It is several agreements layered on top of each other, each one aimed at a different part of the problem, each one addressed to a different audience. The first layer is about the church. Clause 1 is clear on this. The English church shall be free, and shall have its rights undiminished and its liberties unimpaired. This clause was Langton's price. Stephen Langton, the Archbishop of Canterbury, the man John refused for 6 years, the man installed by papal authority over royal objection, has been the central mediator in these negotiations. Without him, the two sides might not have found a common language. He brought theological legitimacy to what the barons were doing. He gave them a frame for their rebellion that was not merely self-interest, not merely a group of wealthy men protecting their wealth, but a moral and legal argument rooted in the Church's own understanding of the limits of earthly power. The Church had its grievances too, and Clause 1 acknowledges them. But Clause 1 also did something else. By placing the Church's freedom first, before any of the baronial demands, the document declared itself to be about principle, not just property. This was important. This was the difference between a rebel manifesto and a constitutional document. The second layer is about money. Clauses 12 and 14 sit at the heart of the financial dispute. Clause 12 says no scutage or aid shall be imposed on the kingdom unless by the common council of the kingdom. Clause 14 describes what that council looks like. The archbishops, bishops, abbots, earls, and greater barons summoned individually by letter, the lesser tenants-in-chief summoned collectively, given 40 days' notice, assembled at a fixed place and time, convened to consider whatever the king is asking for. This is not a parliament.
The word parliament does not exist yet.
It will not exist for another 50 years, and when it does, it will be shaped in part by the precedent being established tonight on this damp field. But this is the shape of what a parliament will become. A formal gathering. A legal requirement for consultation before taxation. A place where the king must ask before he can take. The third layer is about justice. Clauses 39 and 40 are the ones you have heard quoted most often, the same ones Robert named tonight, the ones said and re-said in the conversations of this camp until the language of them has worn grooves in the air. These are not new ideas. Legal scholars, men trained at Bologna, at Paris, at Oxford, have been writing about the concept of due process for generations, drawing on Roman law, on canon law, on the writings of church fathers who argued that even kings were subject to the moral law of God. The idea that judgment requires a proper procedure, that arbitrary power is a corruption of authority, that law must constrain even the sovereign, this is in the air of the 13th century. What is new is that a king wrote it down and sealed it. What is new is the sheepskin. You have heard it said in this camp by a man who had studied law at Oxford for 3 years before his lord called him back to manage an estate, that the significance of the charter is not its content but its form. The content, the specific clauses can be argued, can be revoked, can be reissued with modifications, as Henry I's coronation charter was modified from its original form before it meant anything lasting. But the act of writing it down, the act of sealing it, establishes something that cannot be fully undone. It establishes the precedent that the king's power has limits, that those limits can be named, that named limits can be recorded, and recorded limits can be demanded again. You did not understand all of this when the lawyer said it. You understood more of it than you expected. The camp is very quiet. You get up and check the tent flap. You push it aside an inch and look out. The night is complete, no moon visible, a thick cloud cover that presses down over the field and muffles even the sound of the river. The torches on the perimeter of the camp have burned to embers on their stakes, the guards visible only as dark shapes at intervals. 2 of them are standing perhaps 40 feet apart, not talking. One has his arms crossed over his chest against the cold. Somewhere further into the camp, toward the supply carts, a dog is moving through the wet grass. You can hear its feet. Then nothing. You let the flap fall. The tent is warm by comparison. You sit back down and consider the 4th layer of the document, which is the strangest one. The security clause. Clause 61. You have heard this one described only twice, but both descriptions were detailed enough that you have been able to reconstruct it. 25 barons, chosen by the rebel lords, empowered by the charter to receive complaints against the king's conduct. If the king violates the terms of the charter, and fails to remedy the violation within 40 days of being notified by the 25, then those 25 barons, with the commune of the whole land, shall distrain and distress the king in every possible way, namely by seizing castles, lands, and possessions. This is what the clause says. It says the barons have the legal right, not merely the practical ability, but the legal right, inscribed in the charter itself, to make war on the king if he breaks his word. This is not a feudal rebellion. Feudal rebellions happen. They are as much a part of the landscape as disputed field boundaries and bad harvests. Lords break faith with their overlords and fight, and the matter is settled by force or negotiation, and everyone goes back to their positions. This is different. This is a document that codifies the right of resistance. That gives rebellion a legal form. That says if the king wrongs you and refuses to make it right, the law itself authorizes you to take his castles. You are 22 years old and you have not studied law, but you understand the weight of this. Anyone who thinks about it for long enough understands the weight of it. You understand why John is smiling. Because a clause like this cannot be enforced without ongoing unity among the barons. And ongoing unity among barons is difficult to maintain. The moment the external pressure of rebellion eases, the moment the charter is sealed and the immediate crisis passes, each baron goes back to his own estate and his own interests and his own disputes with his neighbors. The 25 will disagree. They will fracture over specific cases, over which violations merit response, over whether the 40 days have been counted correctly. And John knows this. You sit with this knowledge the way you sit with the cold. It is there. It is real. There is nothing to do about it tonight. You think about John's smile. You have not seen it yourself, but it has been described to you more than once by men who have. Not a warm smile. Not the smile of a man who is pleased. The smile of a man who is ahead of you and knows it and is not going to tell you how. John has been dealing with barons since he inherited the crown. He knows how they think. He knows what they want. He knows that what they want, fundamentally, is security. The security of their land holdings, the security of their inheritance, the security of knowing that what they have today they will still have tomorrow. This is not an unreasonable thing to want. This is, in fact, the thing that every person in every position wants in some form. The barons want it for their estates. Your father wants it for his 100 acres. You want it for your 12 shillings a year and your sleeping space in Robert's household. John knows this. And John knows that the moment the charter is sealed, the specific crisis that drove the barons to rebel begins to ease. The crisis eases. The threat recedes. The unity that required a common enemy to maintain begins to fragment. You have heard it described this way. An army of barons is like a flood. Powerful when moving, destructive when it reaches you. But a flood that has no particular destination eventually spreads itself thin across flat ground, loses its force, becomes groundwater. The barons will spread themselves thin. Each one will go back to his estate and his interests and his local disputes. The 25 will find themselves in disagreement about specifics, about which violations of the Charter are serious enough to trigger the enforcement clause, about whether 40 days have been properly counted, about whether John's response to a complaint constitutes remedy or evasion. John, meanwhile, will not be spreading himself thin. John will be focused. John will write more letters to Rome. John will hire more mercenaries, mercenaries paid in advance and therefore loyal in advance. John will wait. And there is nothing to do about it tonight except let the fire breathe and watch the dark. You hear movement outside. Not the guards. Something closer. Someone walking between the tents with a deliberate quietness that means they know they are moving through other people's sleep and are trying not to disturb it. You do not move. The footsteps pass. A servant, probably from another tent on the same errand you were on an hour ago, checking a brazier, carrying water, existing in the margins of this event. You think about the scribes. The royal chancery scribes who are somewhere in this camp, or perhaps closer to Windsor, you are not certain, copying 63 clauses of Latin by candlelight, their quills moving across the pale surface of the parchment in the careful rhythm of professional copying. Each copy takes hours. The work is meticulous because a copying error in a legal document is not a small thing. A missed word, a transposed phrase, and the meaning of a clause can shift in ways that lawyers will argue about for generations. They will not sleep tonight either. They are writing history without knowing it, which is the most common way history gets written. The brazier is holding steady now. 2 pieces was the right amount. You have been managing this brazier for 4 days, and you know its rhythms, how it breathes when the charcoal is fresh, how it flattens when it needs attention, how the color of the embers changes as they age. Robert is still asleep. His breathing is even and slow. In a few hours it will be morning, and the morning will move quickly, and there will be no more sitting on stools in quiet tents thinking about the structure of legal documents. There will be horses and boots and the movement of men across the field toward a table where something will happen that cannot be unhappened, or at least cannot be unhappened easily. You lean your back against the tent pole. The canvas breathes slightly in the wind off the river. You close your eyes and let the dark come back. Not sleep. Just the dark. Just the waiting. The river is out there, carrying everything downstream. The document is almost finished. Morning is maybe 3 hours east of here. You let the time pass. The dark does not last. It never does. At some point, you are not sure exactly when, because the change is gradual and comes from the east. The quality of the black outside the tent shifts. Not lighter, just less solid. The difference between a darkness that is complete and a darkness that has something behind it. You know this shift. You have watched for it on enough early mornings that it has become something your body reads before your eyes do. You straighten on the stool and put both feet flat on the ground. Your lower back aches from the angle you fell into sometime in the past hour. Not sleep. You were not quite asleep. But the stool had let your spine do something it should not have done for that long, and now there is a familiar tightness across the left side of your lower back that will ease once you start moving. You stand up slowly. Robert is still asleep. You check the brazier, low again but not out, and the night is nearly done, so you leave it and let it breathe down on its own. You go to the water bucket, still half full. You cup your hands and drink, the water cold enough that you can feel it moving down your throat, and then you splash the rest across your face. The cold is significant. You do it twice. Then you stand and breathe and listen. The sensation of cold water on your face in the early morning is one of those experiences that exists outside of context. It does not matter that you are in a camp on a field by a river on the most important morning in recent English history. The cold water is the cold water. Your face is your face. The shock of it is identical to the shock you felt at 14 on your first morning in Robert's household, washing in a basin in a stone corridor that had not been warm since October. Identical to every morning since. The body does not know what day it is. The body knows cold and not cold, hungry and not hungry, rested and not rested. You are not rested. But the cold water helps. It pulls you back into the practical, into the immediate, into the specific requirements of this morning. You need to check the tent. You need to find out where Warren's tent is. You need to have the formal clothes ready before Robert needs them. You need to arrange a guard for the chest. You need to find breakfast. These are the things you need to do. You do them. The camp is beginning. Not moving yet, not loudly, not with purpose, but the sound of people in a field shifting from sleep toward wakefulness has a texture you recognize from years of early mornings in various camps and halls and stables. Individual and collective at once. A horse somewhere, stamping against the damp. A voice, low, giving an instruction you cannot make out. The sound of a peg being driven into ground, someone resecuring a tent that worked loose in the night wind. These sounds are the beginning of the day. You step outside. The air is cold and smells of wood smoke and river and the green smell of wet meadow grass that has been pressed down under the weight of many feet and is trying to recover its shape in the dark. The sky above the field is a dark gray, the eastern edge of it warming toward something, not yet color but the direction of color. The grass is wet. Your boots take the moisture immediately through the leather. You will need to treat them before this season is over. The leather has been wet too many times in the last 2 weeks and will begin to stiffen and crack if you don't work oil into it soon. You stand for a moment and look east, toward where the light is coming. Windsor is over there, invisible behind the dark and the distance. The king is over there. You think about John, not as the king, as a man you have never seen clearly, only heard described, glimpsed at a distance during the negotiations across the water. John Plantagenet. Born 1167 in Oxford, the fourth surviving son of Henry II and Eleanor of Aquitaine. He is 47 years old this summer. He has been king for 16 years, since the death of his brother Richard at the siege of Chalus-Chabrol in 1199. He has ruled England while losing Normandy, while alienating the church, while taxing his barons past the point of tolerance, while maintaining a court that his contemporaries described as brilliant and dangerous in equal measure. He has also, you have heard it said by men who have been close to him, a genuine intelligence. He was educated in ways that English kings often were not. He read, which was uncommon. He kept books. He followed legal arguments closely. He understood his own administrative machinery with a precision that some of his barons found unsettling. He maintained detailed records of debts and obligations. He knew exactly what everyone owed him. He was not a fool. This is the thing that makes the past 16 years complicated. He was not a fool. He was a man of substantial intelligence who made decisions that accumulated, one on top of another, into a situation that required him to come to a field by a river and seal a document that named the limits of his authority. You find this thought interesting, in the way that quiet early mornings make thoughts interesting. How much of what happened was temperament, and how much was circumstance? Whether a different man would have lost Normandy, or whether Normandy was always going to fall to the French crown eventually. Whether the baronial rebellion was the inevitable product of Angevin kingship, a style of rule that had always pushed at the limits of what barons would accept, or whether John specifically, individually, made choices that no other man would have made. You do not know the answer. You are 22 and you are standing in a field with wet boots and a stiff back, and you have been awake most of the night thinking about legal philosophy and the nature of political disaster. Philosophical history is somewhat beyond your brief, but the question stays with you as you walk the perimeter of Robert's tent. You think about Henry II, John's father, the king who made the legal system that John is now being forced to constrain. Henry II was, by most accounts, a remarkable administrator. He reformed the English common law. He created the system of traveling royal judges, the circuit judges who moved through the counties, hearing cases, applying a consistent royal law, rather than the patchwork of local customs that had governed before. He created the jury system in something close to its modern form, not the jury that decides guilt or innocence that comes later, but the jury that presents cases to the court. A group of local men sworn to report on local conditions and local crimes. He created the distinction between criminal law and civil law in ways that are still in use. He made England more governable than it had been before him. And then he killed Thomas Becket. Or rather, he said the words that caused 4 of his knights to ride to Canterbury Cathedral and cut Thomas Becket down at the altar on the 29th of December, 1170. He said, "Will no one rid me of this turbulent priest?" He may have meant it as a rhetorical complaint. The 4 knights did not take it as rhetorical. Becket was the Archbishop of Canterbury, the same position that Langton holds now, the position John fought Rome about for 6 years. Becket and Henry had been friends once, close friends, and Henry had appointed Becket Archbishop expecting an ally in his ongoing conflicts with the church over legal jurisdiction. Instead, Becket became the church's most committed defender. They fought for years. Becket went into exile. He came back. He excommunicated the bishops who had supported Henry's positions. And Henry said those words, and 4 knights heard them. Becket's murder made him a saint within 2 years. Pope Alexander III canonized him in 1173. His shrine at Canterbury became the most important pilgrimage destination in England. The Canterbury Pilgrimage, the journey you make if you want to pray at the place where the Archbishop died. Henry did public penance. He walked to Canterbury in sackcloth and was flogged by monks at Becket's tomb. This is what it costs you to kill an archbishop. John would not have forgotten this. John grew up with it. His father's humiliation at Canterbury, the price of killing the wrong man, the lesson about the limits of royal power, even when the power is very great. And yet John chose the same fight, the same position, the refusal to accept the Pope's candidate, the same collision with Rome. Whether he forgot the lesson or simply believed he could win where his father lost, you cannot know. But standing in this field on this morning, you think about how much of this has been building for a very long time. Not since John. Not since Richard. Since Henry. Since William. The questions being answered in this field today are questions that have been circling the English crown since the conquest. Who is sovereign? The king or the law? The crown or the church? The individual or the obligation? Today is not an answer. Today is a document that describes what the answer might look like. Whether the answer holds is a different question. You check the tent stakes and go back inside. All 4 corners are secure. The ropes are tight. The tent has held through the night wind and the damp without complaint. You look across the camp. Other men are emerging from other tents now. Servants, mostly. The first ones out are always the servants, doing exactly what you are doing, checking and preparing and making the morning functional before the people who matter need it to be functional. You can see, toward the eastern edge of the camp, a cook fire being restarted. The orange of it vivid against the gray, someone crouching over it with practiced patience. Someone is beginning breakfast for whoever that tent serves. The smell of wood smoke sharpens and spreads. You go back inside. Robert is sitting up. He has that look that some people have in the first moments of waking, not confused exactly, but briefly absent from themselves, as if the day has not quite settled into the body yet. As if the mind is still pulling itself back from wherever it goes during sleep. Then he looks at you, and it does. He says, "What time is it?" You say, "Just after first light, my lord." He sits on the edge of the cot and begins lacing his boots. He does not ask for help. He has never asked for help with his boots, not in 6 years. This is one of those small things you learned early about the man you serve, what he wants attended to, and what he prefers to do himself, and where the line between service and intrusion falls. Every lord draws that line differently. Robert draws it at his boots and at the arrangement of his own sword and at the composition of letters which he drafts himself in his own hand and then has a clerk copy fair. Everything else he will accept assistance with. He says, "I need to speak with Warren this morning." You know who he means. William de Warren, Earl of Surrey. A significant figure in the rebel coalition, one of the barons whose name will be in the document, a man with enough standing to be worth a private conversation with your lord. Robert has been trying to arrange this conversation since the first day. You say, "I can take a message." He says, "Not a message." He says it without elaboration, which means the conversation needs to happen in person, and the content of it is not something he is going to share with you. This is also normal. You know the shape of your access to information. Some things you hear because you are present. Some things you are near without hearing, because the canvas between you and the conversation is thick enough. Some things are simply not yours. You say, "I'll find out where his tent is positioned." Robert nods. He stands and rolls his shoulders and tests the range of movement in his neck, tilting his head to the right and then left. This is something he does every morning. The neck is an old complaint, a tournament injury from before you were in his service, a fall from a horse at a bad angle that left something slightly wrong in the joint between two vertebrae, something that occasionally wakes him in the night and is always stiff in the morning. He does not talk about it. Outside, the camp is properly awake now. The cook fire you saw earlier has companions, 3 or 4 rising columns of smoke moving upward in the still morning air. The horses are audible from their lines. A large camp this size requires significant horse management. The animals must be watered before dawn, fed from the supply carts that have been replenishing from villages in the area, checked for lameness or sickness, kept in their proper order. 2,000 men, with knights among them, each knight with at least one destrier for battle, and likely a palfrey for travel, and a rouncey for carrying equipment. The total horse count in this camp might exceed 3,000 animals. They require water and feed before anything else happens. The men who manage horses are among the first awake in any camp, always, because the horses cannot wait. You leave Robert to finish dressing and go to find Warren's tent. Before you go, you check the water bucket again, nearly empty from this morning's use. You carry it to the water point, which is a large barrel on a cart near the center of the camp, replenished twice daily from the river via a chain of smaller containers carried by whoever draws the task. You fill it. You carry it back. You set it inside the tent opening where Robert can reach it. Then you go. The camp in the morning has a different sound from the camp at night. At night it is individual, the sounds of specific people and specific animals making specific noises, each one distinguishable from the others. In the morning it becomes collective. The sum of several thousand people doing their morning tasks at the same time creates a texture of sound that is not any one thing, not the blacksmith, not the cook, not the horses, but all of them together, layered, producing a kind of low, continuous roar that is less loud than it sounds when you try to describe it. You move through it. You have been thinking since you woke about the feudal system, about the chain of obligation that connects your father's 100 acres to the king's treasury. Not theoretically, practically. Your father holds his land from a man named Thomas, a minor lord with perhaps 500 acres in total, 2 villages and a mill. Thomas holds from Robert. Robert holds from the crown directly. He is a tenant-in-chief, one of the men who holds his land from the king rather than from an intermediate lord. This makes Robert's relationship to the crown more direct and more legible than Thomas's relationship to anyone. When the king wants scutage, he goes to his tenants-in-chief. They pay or they pass the obligation downward. Thomas passes it to your father. Your father pays. The money moves upward through the same chain that land grants moved downward through a century and a half ago, when William divided England among his followers, and each follower divided his share among his own. The result is that the king, sitting at the top of this chain, can extract money from the entire kingdom, from the 100-acre holders and the 500-acre holders, and everyone in between, by applying pressure only to the men directly below him. He does not need to know your father exists. He only needs to know Robert exists. And Robert only needs to know Thomas exists. And Thomas needs to know your father exists. Clause 12, if it holds, inserts a requirement into this chain at the top. The king must ask the council before he can apply that pressure. The council has the legal right to say no. Whether it will use that right is a different question. But the right is there. In writing. In wax. Sealed. The camp has a loose organization to it, not chaotic, but flexible in the way that a temporary settlement always is, arranged by proximity and convenience rather than formal plan. The great barons are in the center, their tents larger, their perimeters marked by their household banners on short poles. Lesser lords ring the outside. Supply carts and horses are further out still, at the edge of the meadow where the ground is firmer and the smell is more manageable. You have been moving through this camp for 4 days, and you have a working knowledge of where things are, which cook fires belong to which households, which guards change at which hours, which paths between tents stay dry and which turn to mud in the rain. This is your job, not the dramatic parts. The geography of the immediate world, held in your head so that you can move through it efficiently. You find someone who knows where Warren's tent is within 5 minutes. Another servant, older than you by 20 years or more, with the calm and slightly worn look of a man who has been doing this specific work for longer than you have been alive. He tells you, southeast corner, near the large oak. There is one large oak at the edge of the meadow, its canopy spread over the corner of the camp like a roof. You know where it is. You thank him. You head back through the camp, noting the positions as you go. The morning air has something in it beyond cold now. Something that makes the inside of your nose sharp and alive. This is the smell of the river when the temperature drops overnight and the water is slightly warmer than the air above it. The Thames exhaling, in a way, giving off its stored heat into the cold June morning. A thin mist sits at ground level in the lower sections of the field, filling the hollows of the grass, lying along the river margin in a pale band. By mid-morning it will be gone. But right now it sits there like something the night left behind when it retreated. You report back to Robert. Southeast corner, near the oak. He says, "Good." He says, "Come with me." The walk to Warren's tent takes perhaps 10 minutes through the dense middle section of the camp. Robert moves with the authority of a man who has decided where he is going and expects the space around him to accommodate this. You follow at your distance. Warren's tent is larger than Robert's. Not extravagantly larger. But the difference is visible. An extra panel of canvas on the side wall, a second entrance flap, the household banner on a short pole driven into the ground outside. The banner is red and gold. The checky pattern of the Warren family, one of the oldest in England. William de Warren, Earl of Surrey, has a lineage that traces back to the Conquest. His ancestor came over with William in 1066 and received Surrey as his reward. 149 years of unbroken English earldom. You stand outside the tent and wait while Robert goes in. You are not invited. This is expected. You find a place near the tent wall where you are out of the way, and you stand there and watch the camp continue its mourning. The cook fires are fully established now. You can smell bread, not fresh bread, but hard bread being warmed near the fire, the closest thing to fresh that a campaign camp can produce. There is also the smell of pottage from somewhere to your left, the grain-thick smell of something boiling long and slow. You think about what William de Warren represents in this rebellion. He is one of the 25. He is one of the men who will be named in the document, whose name will be attached to the security clause, who will have the legal authority to move against the king if the charter is broken. His family's history is a useful measure of what is at stake. The first Warren came over with the conqueror and was given land because he was useful. He was useful because he could fight, because he was loyal, because he brought men with him. The gift of Surrey was a reward for service. The land was not Surrey's to give. It belonged to the people who had lived on it before 1066, who were dispossessed to provide this gift. That is how England works. That is how it has worked for 149 years. The gift becomes inheritance. The inheritance becomes right. And when the king threatens that right, when John threatens the stability of what families like the Warrens hold, the barons do not experience it as a threat to recent acquisitions. They experience it as a threat to what is ancient, settled, legitimate. This is why they fight. Not because they want to limit all power, because they want to protect their own. From inside the tent, no voices. The canvas is thick enough. The morning moves around you. Robert comes out of the tent a few minutes later. He gives nothing away in his face. He says, "Stay close this morning." You say, "Yes, my lord." He says, "I want to be at the field before the hour." You understand him to mean before the formal proceedings begin, which have been announced for mid-morning. The exact structure of today's ceremony is not entirely clear to anyone you have spoken to. The document will be produced. The King's Great Seal will be affixed. Whether John will speak, whether there will be formal declarations, whether the 25 are announced publicly, these details are not settled, or if they are settled, the settling happened in conversations you were not near. What you know is that by the end of today, the thing will be done. Sealed copies distributed. The charter legally in effect. You begin making the tent ready for the ceremony. The folding table collapses along two joints. The camp stools stack. The chest does not move. It stays here with a guard you will arrange before you leave. The brazier is nearly cool now. You leave it. You fold the bedding into a tight roll and tie it with the leather strap and set it near the entrance, ready for whoever collects it later. These are your hands in the morning. This is what you do. The chest. Open it. The formal clothes are on top, wrapped in linen cloth to protect them from the damp. Robert's court garments. Not armor. Today is not a military occasion. Today is a ceremony, and ceremony requires different cloth. You unwrap them carefully, laying the linen wrapping flat on the camp stool. A wool supertunic of dark blue, lined with a thin wool batting for warmth. The stitching on the collar and cuffs is detailed work, geometric pattern in gold thread, the kind that requires an embroiderer with years of specific training, the kind that costs considerably more than the cloth itself. This garment cost more than your annual wage. More than 2 annual wages, probably, if you count the embroidery separately. You hold it up and check it for damage from the travel and the damp. A small wrinkle across one shoulder from the folding. You spread it over the camp stool and smooth it with your hands, working the wrinkle out slowly with the heel of your palm. Good wool does this. It has a memory for its original shape and returns to it with handling and gentle pressure. You work until the shoulder lies flat. Then the undershirt, linen fine enough to sit against skin without irritating. Then the belt. Leather dyed dark with a silver buckle that is not ornamental but is finely made. The kind of object that announces its quality without advertising it. No sword today. Today is not that kind of occasion. The sword stays in the chest. You lay everything out in the order it will go on. Undershirt first, linen. Tunic. Supertunic. Belt. You do not need to be told the order. You have been dressing this man for 6 years. You know the order the way you know everything else, not as instruction but as body memory, absorbed from repetition until it is faster than thought, until your hands know what comes next before your mind has finished deciding. Outside, the camp is fully moving now. You can hear voices without trying, conversations, instructions, the sound of organized men beginning a shared task. From somewhere to the south, the irregular beat of a drum. Not military rhythm. Just someone with a drum, marking time or relieving boredom or both. You shoulder through the tent flap and go to find breakfast. The cook fire you identified earlier is for another lord's household, but in a camp this size, the custom is loose. You approach with a cup, you are given something, you nod and move on. This is understood between servants without needing to be spoken. Pottage. Thick, gray beige, faintly salted, still steaming from the pot. You eat it standing near the fire because the warmth is useful. The man tending the fire is perhaps 40, heavy-set, with hands that have been near fire for long enough to lose their sensitivity to ordinary heat. He doesn't look at you while you eat. He tends the fire. You eat. This is the morning of one of the most important days in English legal history, and here at the edge of it, two men stand near a fire and eat gray pottage and say nothing to each other. History is mostly this. You give the cup back and nod and go. By the time you return to Robert's tent, he is standing outside it in his camp clothes, watching the camp move. He sees the formal clothes laid out through the open flap. He says nothing, which means they are correctly prepared. You have learned to read approval in the absence of correction. He says, "The scribes finished last night." He has found this out somewhere, in Warren's tent perhaps, or in the conversation of the cook fires. The copies are complete. 4 of them you believe, though some accounts in the camp say more. They will be distributed to specific locations: Lincoln Cathedral, Salisbury Cathedral, the Temple Church in London. Places where documents of legal importance are kept, where clergy maintain records, where the physical object can be preserved and consulted and pointed to. You think about a document sitting in Lincoln Cathedral 50 years from now. About a monk whose job it is to maintain the archive, to ensure that things written in ink survive the ordinary catastrophe of time. About that monk reading it 100 years from now, when everyone in this field is dead and the names of the men who were here are fading into chronicle. The parchment, the ink, the wax, the marks made on sheepskin by men who are alive today and will not be alive forever. Robert says we should go. It is earlier than the 3rd hour. But you understand him. He wants to be at the field before the crowd settles. He wants to see it as it is being assembled, not as it already is. You take your position behind him. You walk. The camp between the tents and the open field is a compressed world, bodies moving in different directions, horses being led toward the perimeter, equipment being shifted, the smell of everything concentrated by proximity and urgency. You move through it, and then you are through it, and the field opens. The open ground of Runnymede. Flat and wide and wet-grassed and ordinary, except that it is not ordinary at all today. A table has been set up near the riverside of the field. 2 trestle tables, actually, pushed together and covered with a cloth. Several figures standing near it, officials by their dress, the kind of men who spend their working lives near the administrative machinery of the crown and have the posture of men who know their function and are about to perform it. Soldiers in a loose perimeter, not aggressive, just present, the formal boundary of a formal occasion. Other lords and their retinues are arriving from the camp, moving toward the field from different directions, converging on the same point. You and Robert take a position perhaps 30 feet from the table, not in the front, not in the back. Robert finds a spot where he can see clearly, which puts you slightly behind him and to the left. This is your position today. This is where you will stand. You look at the table. You look at the cloth. You look at the river beyond the field, finally visible from here, wide and brown and unhurried. You have been moving toward this moment for 4 days, and the moment is a table with a cloth on it. This is not a disappointment. This is correct. The most important things usually look like ordinary objects. The sheepskin the document is written on is an ordinary sheepskin. The ink is ink made from oak galls and iron and water. The wax is wax. The king's seal is a disc of hardened material impressed with an image. The field is a field. And yet the document will last 800 years, and the field will be visited by scholars and tourists who cannot quite believe that something so large happened somewhere so flat and unremarkable. You stand in it now, and you believe it. Because you were here for the 4 days that led to this morning. Because you carried the water and tended the brazier and listened in the margins of the conversations. Because the weight of it is not in the object. The weight of it is in the accumulation of all the days and arguments and letters and battles and refusals and concessions that made this table necessary. The table is just where it arrived. And you wait. Around you, the field fills. Slowly, and then all at once, the way crowds fill spaces. One moment there is room, and the next moment there are men everywhere, arranged in their various ranks and groupings, their banners held by squires or driven into the soft ground, their faces turned toward the table. The crowd is very quiet. The kind of quiet that only that many people can produce together when they all decide simultaneously to stop talking. You stand inside it. You breathe. You wait for the king. He comes from the north, from the direction of Windsor. You cannot see him yet. You know he is coming because the crowd shifts, not loudly, not dramatically, just the adjustment of many bodies orienting toward the same point. A lean of attention, a collective turn of faces toward the northern edge of the field. And then you can see the movement at the northern edge of the field. The king's party. How many men? You cannot count at this distance. But the banners are visible. The royal arms. 3 gold lions on red, or gules, 3 lions passant gardant, or, if you use the language of heraldry that you have heard the heralds use, the same design that has been on the English royal banner since Richard I adopted it, the same lions that appear on the shields and surcoats and seals of the crown's representatives in every corner of the kingdom. They move across the field at a walking pace, the procession deliberate and measured. The kind of pace that says, "This is not a retreat, and it is not a surrender, and I am moving through this formally, and formally is how I choose to meet it." You cannot see John's face. 30 feet from the table, and the king's party between you and him, and the men ahead of you blocking the low angle. You see the top of a head, dark hair, a figure of middle height, dressed in formal court clothes, moving with the careful dignity of a man who knows he is being watched by everyone and has decided how he is going to let himself be watched. Nothing visible from here that would distinguish him from any other man of rank. He is just a man from this distance, just a body moving across a field on a morning in June. This is the thing about proximity to great events. The reality of them is always smaller than the idea. The field is just a field. The table is just two trestle tables with a cloth. The document is just sheepskin and ink. And the king is just a man moving across the morning grass with the Thames behind him and 800 years of consequence ahead of him that he cannot see. None of you can see it. That is what makes it real. The king's party reaches the table. Arrangements happen, officials moving, documents produced and unrolled, placed carefully on the cloth surface. From where you stand, you can see the table, but not what is on it. You can see the backs of the men standing closest to it. You can see Langton, you believe that is Langton, the archbishop, identifiable by his ecclesiastical dress, the cope and the staff, standing slightly apart from the political men, occupying his middle position between the parties as he has occupied it throughout the entire negotiation. He has been in this position for months. The man John would not accept. The man Rome insisted on. The man who threaded the language of the document between legal precision and theological legitimacy, who made it possible for both sides to say they had gotten something worth getting. There is something right about him standing here at the moment of completion. Something that looks, from 30 feet away, like a closed circle. You look at Robert. He is watching the table. His face is still. He has the look of a man watching something he has worked toward for months, something he may have doubted would ever actually happen, watching it happen. You do not know what he is feeling. You have a sense of it after 6 years, something between relief and a more complicated thing that does not have a simple name. But the interior of another person is not a place you can enter. You can observe the outside. You observe it. At the table, a man produces the seal. You cannot see it clearly. But you can see the action, the reach into a carried case, the removal of something, the placement of it near the documents. The Great Seal of King John. A disc perhaps 3 inches across, made of beeswax mixed with resin for hardness, sometimes colored with vermilion to give it the deep red that royal documents are known for. On one face, the king on horseback, in armor, sword raised. On the other, the king enthroned, in majesty, scepter in hand, the formal posture of judgment and governance. These are the 2 aspects of medieval kingship, the warrior and the judge. The man who holds the land by force, and the man who holds it by right, and the claim that these 2 things are the same man. The seal makes both claims at once, in wax, in image, in the pressure of a matrix against a surface. There is a procedure for sealing a document. The clerk applies a small amount of heat to soften the wax. The wax is pressed out flat. The seal matrix, a carved metal tool bearing the king's image, kept under close guard by the chancellor, is pressed into it with even pressure. The whole disc of wax is attached to the document by a tongue of parchment cut from the bottom of the document itself, threaded through a slit, the wax disc hanging from the document by this tongue like a pendant. The seal hardens as it cools. It takes perhaps a minute from soft wax to finished seal. 1 minute. You watch the backs of the men at the table. You cannot see the moment itself. You will never be able to say you saw the seal pressed. But you can see the stillness at the table, a stillness different from the stillness of waiting, the stillness of a thing in the act of completing, and then the movement that follows it. The movement of men finishing something. The release of posture that comes when an action is complete and the body knows it before the mind has finished processing. The clerk steps back. Another steps back. The documents are rolled or folded carefully, the way objects of great value are handled, deliberately, without haste, with the full attention of the hands. Some are handed to specific recipients, representatives of the cathedral chapters, men who have traveled to be present specifically for this transfer. The copies going to their destinations. The moment distributing itself across the kingdom. There is no announcement that you can hear. No proclamation that reaches your position. If there is speech at the table, it is swallowed by the distance and the size of the crowd. What you get is the visual, the table, the men, the documents, and the sound of the field around you, which is still nearly silent. And then not silent, not loud, not a cheer, not the sound of celebration, not the noise of men who have won something and want the world to know it. Something quieter and more complex than that. The field begins to move and talk and break its collective stillness, the way a body of water breaks after something has been dropped into it. Not all at once. From the center out, rippling. You can feel it reach you. A loosening. A collective exhale. Robert turns to look at you. Just briefly. He says nothing. Neither do you. There is nothing to say that the moment has not already said, and the moment has not said anything in words, and so silence is correct. You stand there for a while longer. The field continues to move around you. Men begin to drift toward their camps, or toward other men they need to speak with, or simply away from the center of the thing. The ceremony is over. The document is sealed. Several copies of it are already moving toward locations where they will be kept, will be maintained, will outlast every person in this field. 2 of those copies will survive intact into the 21st century. You do not know this. No one here knows this. What they know is what they have done. What you know is what you watched. And what you watched from 30 feet away over the backs of men whose names will be remembered and under a June sky that is finally clearing is the moment a king wrote down that he had limits. The moment the word no acquired legal weight in the space between a king and his subjects. The moment a principle that scholars had argued about for generations became a fact in parchment and wax. You are 22 years old. You will live, let us say, to 53. 31 more years. In those 31 years, you will watch the charter be annulled. Pope Innocent III will annul it within 10 weeks of today, declaring it shameful, demeaning, illegal, unjust, depraved, and null and void. Within 10 weeks, John will go to war against his barons. The First Barons' War will begin before the year is out. John will invite a French invasion. The barons, in desperation, will offer the English crown to Louis, son of the French king, who will land in England in May 1216 with an army. You will hear about this on the road north or in a hall somewhere, the news traveling the way news travels, unreliably in fragments, arriving weeks after the events it describes. John will die in October 1216 of dysentery on campaign in the east of England, having lost his baggage train and much of his treasury in the Wash. He will die still fighting. His 9-year-old son Henry will become king. And Henry's regents, William Marshal, one of the greatest knights in English history, a man who had served 4 kings and was 70 years old and still commanding, will reissue the charter, not as a rebel document, as the new king's own, as the first act of the new reign, to show that the crown accepts limits, to hold the kingdom together, to bring the barons who had invited the French back to the English side. The charter will be reissued in 1216, and again in 1217, and again in 1225, when it takes the form that becomes definitive. It will be confirmed by subsequent kings more than 30 times over the following centuries. In 1265, a man named Simon de Montfort will summon a gathering that includes not just barons and bishops, but knights and burgesses, representatives of towns and counties, and this gathering will be remembered as one of the precursors of what England comes to call Parliament. He will be drawing on what happened here, on this field, on this document. In 1297, Edward I will confirm the charter as part of English statute law, and at that point it stops being something that can be simply revoked. It becomes part of the legal structure of the kingdom. It will be cited by English parliamentarians in the 17th century when they argue against the prerogative of Charles I, a king who, like John, believed his authority was absolute. Charles I will be executed in 1649. The charter will survive him. It will be read by the men who draft the American Constitution and the Bill of Rights, who will borrow its language and its structure and its underlying logic. It will be translated into dozens of languages. It will be displayed in museums, under glass, in controlled environments designed to preserve the parchment indefinitely. It will outlast John. It will outlast Henry. It will outlast every person standing in this field. You will live to see the reissues. You will live to see Robert's household adjust to the aftermath of the settlement. Some gains, some disappointments, the ordinary complex outcome of a crisis that resolves without any single party getting everything they wanted. You will live to see the charter become something other than a crisis document, something settled, something that has become part of the architecture of what England understands itself to be. You will not live to see most of what it becomes. But you were here. on the morning it started. You begin to walk back through the field toward the camp. The grass holds the impressions of many feet from this morning, the ground softened by last night's damp, the meadow carrying the weight of what stood on it. Behind you, the table is being dismantled. The trestle legs folded, the cloth removed, the whole temporary structure returned to its components. The field will be a field again by evening. Runnymede will return to meadow grass and river bank and the quiet of a place where nothing is happening. The river will keep moving. You walk. You are thinking, with the clarity that comes from exhaustion and the end of waiting, about the word service. You have been in service for 8 years. The word describes your entire adult life. In service means you belong to a household that is not yours. You eat its food, sleep in its spaces, do its work, and receive in exchange a wage and a position in a structure that gives your life a shape it would not otherwise have. You did not choose this shape. You came into it at 14 because your father had 3 sons and 100 acres, and the first son stays to inherit, and the second son is useful somewhere else. You were the useful one. You have not resented this. Resentment requires a clear alternative, and the alternative for a second son without land is nothing stable, a laborer on someone else's fields, a man without position, without the small dignity that service, even junior service, provides. You have position. You have Robert's household at your back, which means you have the reflected weight of Robert's name when you travel, the protection of belonging, the knowledge that if you are sick there is a household that has an interest in your recovery. This is not nothing. You think about the men in this camp who have no lord, the soldiers hired for the season, the mercenaries who fight for money and have no household at their backs when the fighting is done. You think about them and you think about what the charter means for them, which is very little directly. The charter is about barons and bishops and free men of a certain standing. It is not about hired swords. It is not about the women in the villages along the road who watched you pass. It is not about the villains in the fields, the people tied to the land, whose obligations to their lords go much deeper than scutage. The charter is a document made by powerful men to limit a more powerful man. It is not a document made for everyone. You know this. You have always known this, even before you had words for it. And yet Clause 39 exists. No free man shall be taken, imprisoned, dispossessed, exiled, or in any way destroyed except by the lawful judgment of his peers or by the law of the land. The free men it refers to are a specific legal category. But the words themselves are not categorized. The words say no free man, and the words are on parchment, and the words will be read by people who will argue about who counts as a free man, and those arguments will shift over time, and the definition will expand, slowly, unevenly, with reversals and delays across the centuries. You will not live to see most of that expansion. But the words are down. And words, once down, have a way of being read more broadly than the people who wrote them intended. You heard something like this from the lawyer in camp. He said, "The significance of the charter is not what it says today, but what it can be made to say tomorrow." You understand him better now than you did when he said it. Your boots are thoroughly wet now. Your lower back still holds the memory of the camp stool. You are hungry in a way that the pottage this morning did not fully address. These are the facts of your body on this morning. They do not change because of what just happened. The body keeps its own account, indifferent to historical significance, insisting on its own small, ongoing demands. You are tired. You were awake most of the night. Tonight you will sleep. Tonight the camp will still be here because the formal dissolution of the situation takes time. Men do not immediately leave after something like this. They consolidate. They talk. They arrange their departures, settle outstanding obligations, determine what the settlement means for their specific situations. The machinery of departure requires as much organization as the machinery of arrival. But tonight will be quieter than last night. The waiting will be over. The thing will be done. And you will lie down on your pallet and let the tiredness come, and the tiredness will come without difficulty. Robert is ahead of you, walking back through the field at the same measured pace he moves through everything. You follow at your distance. You watch his back. You have spent a great deal of your life watching this man's back, on the road, in halls, in camps, across the distance that service requires. You know his gait the way you know his sleeping breathing. The slight forward lean when he is thinking about something specific. The straightening when he is conscious of being watched by people who matter to him. The evenness now, which is the gait of a man who has finished something and is moving toward whatever comes next without urgency. He does not look back at you. He rarely does. You exist in his understanding of the world as a reliable presence, there when needed, unobtrusive when not needed, capable of managing the practical details that allow him to attend to the larger ones. Around you, the camp is already beginning the slow transformation back into the business of men who need to go home. You can see it in the way people are moving. Not toward the field anymore, away from it. Toward their own tents, their own horses, the practical questions of departure. It is a different energy from the energy of arrival, less focused, more distributed, each person beginning to reorient toward their own specific destination. Home. You think about it. The village east of York. Your father's 100 acres. The smell of that place in early summer, the green of it, the combination of grass and turned earth and river that does not smell like any other place you have been. Your brother Thomas, who stayed to work the land and is now, at 25, beginning to look like your father, the same way of standing, the same habit of looking at the sky in the morning before saying anything. Your brother William, the priest, who writes occasional letters in a Latin that is better than yours and an English that is worse. You will not go there immediately. Robert has business in London first, obligations that need settling now that the rebellion is resolved, conversations with other lords about what comes next. Perhaps 2 weeks, perhaps a month. But eventually the road will go north, and eventually the north will appear on the horizon, and eventually you will see the country that made you in the way that the country you grow up in makes you. Not something you chose, but something that became part of the structure of how you see everything else. You will not tell the story dramatically when you get there. You were not in the center of it. You were 30 feet back, looking at the backs of men whose names are being written into records you will never read. But you were there. The field was real. The morning was real. The table, the cloth, the wax, the king's face that you never quite saw clearly, all of it was real. And the document most of all. Sheepskin and ink and wax, sitting now in a leather traveling case being carried by a chancery official toward a road that leads to Lincoln. Words that will outlast the men who wrote them. Words that say, not without judgment, not without law, not without consent, not without limits. You walk back through the field. You are very tired. The sun is somewhere above the thinning clouds now, giving the morning a flat and even light that makes everything equally visible. No shadows, no drama, just the field and the camp and the river and the sky. The camp receives you. The tent is as you left it. You go inside. You sit on the camp stool. You let the quiet come in around you the way quiet comes into a tent when the world outside it is slowing down. Outside, the Thames moves past Runnymede the way it has always moved. Wide and slow and unhurried, carrying everything downstream. The day continues. You breathe. The morning has done its work. The document is sealed. The king has gone back across the river. The field is already returning to itself. Let it go now. Let the voices and the banners and the seal and the table all soften at the edges, all recede back into the distance from which you watched them. You were there. That is enough. That is more than enough. The river is still. The tent is warm. The pallet is where you left it. You move to it. You lie down. You pull the blanket up. And the tiredness, which has been waiting patiently for this moment, comes. It comes without difficulty. It comes the way the river moves, not rushing, not forcing, just arriving at the place it was always going. The document is sealed. The morning is finished. And somewhere on a road to Lincoln, the words are already traveling. Good night. If this story found you at the right moment, this channel has more. Every episode built from real history, delivered slowly, meant for exactly this. A subscribe keeps the work going, and it means more than you might think for a channel still finding its footing. A like helps others find their way here. And if you want to know when the next story arrives, the notification bell is there for that. Thank you for spending this night at Runnymede. Sleep well.